in the past, our investigators had gone on to these sites and logged on in an attempt to investigate. We no longer do that. We do not post hate. We have not done it, and we would not condone it.
What made you change your direction? Why did you decide to no longer pursue or check out these websites?
Because we've decided that the better way to collect our evidence is to have our complainants give us their best evidence. That we made a policy change more recently that we would not go on to the websites themselves, and that's the reason why. One point I'd like to make here is that the Canadian Human Rights Commission is always interested in modernizing its practices and processes, doing the best job it can, and being effective for the Canadian public whom we serve. The role that we have also includes advising Parliament, and we have submitted last week a special report to Parliament on exactly on this issue. What is the most effective way to eradicate hate on the Internet, and how does one balance freedom of expression and freedom from hate? So we're constantly updating our processes to improve them, and the forum that is most appropriate for us to do that is A, internally, and secondly, where we feel we need legislative amendments, and we have recommended some, before Parliament.
All right. Commissioner, when did you make the decision to no longer go online on these sites? You say recently. When?
I would have to check back on that specifically, but I think it's something in the last year or so. Now, one of my
that could be. I mean, that's a pretty long time frame, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's not in immediate recent past, but in about a year ago, I think.
Okay. Commissioner, why did you, if you're making recommendations to Parliament, why weren't you before the Parliamentary Committee in Ottawa earlier this week, when very clearly parliamentarians, many of them, have some really significant issues with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and they do want to limit your influence in Section 13 and perhaps totally eliminate the influence of the CHRC when it comes to Section 13?
Well, let me help you to understand, Roy, that there are two committees that have the word human rights in it. The Justice and Human Rights Committee and a subcommittee of the Department, a subcommittee of Foreign Affairs related to international human rights. Canada I chair the International Coordinating Committee of the world's human rights institutions. We were called before the International Human Rights Committee, and I sent my Deputy Chief Commissioner, because this was at the exact same time that we were having our national meeting in Montreal, where I was on the program. And we cleared that with the committee beforehand and the clerk, and that was perfectly fine with them. I had a conflict in my schedule, and the person who works closest with me on the international file went to that. Now, with regard to the other committee, which is a standing committee on human rights in Parliament, I have individually met with each parliamentarian to understand their concerns and views, and I have offered, and they have accepted for that committee.
Okay.
But so debate, which I really welcome, that should happen in the fall.
All right.
The motion regarding the role and mandate of the Commission over hate on the Internet is not before the Parliamentary Committee, the subcommittee that my Deputy Chief Commissioner went to last week.
Okay, Commissioner, that doesn't mean I understand what you're saying, but this doesn't mean anything to the listeners. But I understand you're telling us what the for lack of a better term, pecking order is as far as parliamentary commissions are concerned. Committees are concerned.
Listeners, I'm not sure why we're discussing it. What you asked me why
the point is important, but people don't really understand or care really all that much about subcommittees within Parliament. We want to know what it is that you as the Commissioner are doing. Commissioner, let's get to this issue of whether or not the Canadian Human Rights Commission has ever provided any funding to any kind of complainant. Have you provided any funds of any kind to anyone at any time who raised a complaint?
The answer to that is that according to what is required by law, when we require a witness to attend, we must pay them $20 per day, and if it's outside Ottawa, we must pay their travel expenses. This is the same with every administrative agency and tribunal in the government. So if you call providing funding, abiding by the law, to pay witnesses their travel expenses and $20 a day, then indeed, yes, we do that as required by law.
And that's the only funding that you've provided?
That's correct.
That's it. There's no more?
That's it. No.
Tell me this. We talk about freedom of speech, and you expressed your concerns on Monday about unwitting accomplices in a gross oversimplification of the issue who flame the controversy by repeating inaccuracies. People in media, and I quote you directly.
Right.
Tell me if it's true that a commission investigator, when during a hearing was asked about how much value he placed on freedom of speech, answered that he placed no value on freedom of speech because freedom of speech is an American concept. Is it true, or perhaps to use your words from your Monday speech, a fanning quote of the flames of controversy by repeating inaccuracies? Did that happen?
You have quoted that accurately, because our charter speaks of freedom of expression, and our employee was saying that the jurisdiction, or the freedom of speech language, relates to American legislation, which was not before the tribunal during the case. So, yes, the quotation is accurate, but it's taken out of context. And, of course, we're all about balancing fundamental rights, and freedom of expression is a fundamental right. Okay,
so it was a case of terminology.
Right.
Do you believe the people of Canada, the government, by the way, if I'd been on that stand and someone had said freedom of speech, do you believe in freedom of speech? I might have given the answer that you gave, instead of saying, I don't put any value in freedom of speech because it's an American concept. You understand how that can roll the wrong way, Commissioner?
Many things can roll the wrong way. Of course I can understand how that can roll the wrong way. I can tell you, though, that employee is one of our finest employees. He does an excellent job, and he has been under a significant amount of stress through offensive, not hateful, but offensive language on blogs and that sort of thing. And I can forgive anyone who is maybe not totally an experienced expert witness or not legally trained from having a different selecting different words than I might have at any given time.
Okay. One more question for you. Do you believe the people of Canada, the government of Canada, and its provincial counterparts have the right, and perhaps even more importantly, the responsibility, to regularly monitor the Canadian Human Rights Commission's mandate, and how the Commission fulfills that mandate, and through parliamentary action perhaps alter the Commission's role and areas of influence, a function Parliament performs with other national organizations like the National Parole Board, for example?
Now, that was a long, I'm not sure I have the thread of your question. What I can say is that we are an independent commission, so how we do our work is up to us. However, we are responsible to Parliament, and we advise Parliament, and obviously Parliament is responsible for our legislation, and if Parliament chooses to look at any aspect of our legislation, we are very willing participants, because we want to be modern and effective. And we want to continue to be able to make systemic changes and help individuals who are the most vulnerable have access to the administration of justice. And that's what we're really about, as a screening or filtering body. We don't hold hearings.
All right. Commissioner, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Jennifer Lynch is the Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission on the Roy Green Show on the Corus Radio Network. She explained that the Commission no longer reviews these hate organizations online. She wasn't quite sure what the timeline was, but believes it was a year or so. And she said, as far as funding any complainants before the Human Rights Commission or tribunals are concerned, the only thing that the Commission does is pay for travel expenses, as you heard. Now, I'm going to play back all or much of that interview tomorrow, so if there are things that perhaps you feel like you'd like to hear again, we will play it back for you tomorrow on the Roy Green Show. So we did have the opportunity to speak to Jennifer Lynch. The objective here was to find out as much information as we could about specifics that the Canadian Human Rights Commission is involved in and how the Commission does its job from the Chief Commissioner. That was the objective, to hear the Chief Commissioner's explanation on how the Commission operates and have the Chief Commissioner respond to some of the allegations and charges and challenges that have been put before the Canadian Human Rights Commission.